Superstox is a type of single-seat formula racing, similar to sprint car racing developed in the 1960s in the United Kingdom. Racing is contact, whereby drivers can use the front bumper to help dislodge any car in front. Like most other forms of short oval racing, the higher-rated drivers normally start at the back of the grid for each race. Its original roots come from the mid-1950s. It derived as a cheaper alternative to BriSCA Formula One stock car racing, where a smaller junior formula was raced nationally before the Southern Spedeworth short oval tracks broke away from the main promoting body in 1961 to run their own version of juniors, which they called Formula 2. The cars were originally standard or stock, but became more modified over the years until 1968, when a new stock car formula was introduced and the original much modified class became known as Superstock cars. This was later shortened to Superstox. Today the class bears no resemblance to a road-going car. Chassis are generally built by specialist companies and all the components are special racing ones. The cars are all of front-engine design, although rear engine was allowed up until the mid-1970s. Previous famous drivers include 1973 world champion Derek Warwick and British champion Paul Warwick. World Championship first raced at Ipswich in 1961 before moving to its longtime home at Wimbledon Stadium. The 1962 World Championship was actually the first car meeting held at Wimbledon. The race originally was a world title in name only, although it was an English-domiciled Czech Jan Scott who won the first running. Later in the 60s the event attracted Speedworth's Scottish drivers and then the European competitors from the NACO organisation. The first European cars to race in the UK were different specifications to the UK counterparts, the 1966 Dutch team having V8-powered saloon cars. A stronger affiliation in the early 1970s saw the European drivers racing rear-engine cars, although this type of machine proved less robust than a Superstock car, and they become midgets, leaving the newer front-engine cars that were appearing on the continent as Superstox. The Superstox formula remained essentially a European one until the appearance of some South African drivers in the late 1960s when Speedworth gained an affiliation there. The South Africans only contested the championship until the mid-1970s, as there was no longer an equivalent class there. One American driver, Al Contreras, represented the USA in the early 70s, but he, like the inaugural champion, Scott, was serving as an airman in this country at the time. The Scottish Superstox died out in the 1980s when Gordon McDougall started his own promotion, breaking away from Speedworth and affiliating to BriSCA. The Scottish were represented in the title again in 2011 when the class started up again north of the border. European Championship, second to the World Championship in status of the races held for this formula. The European was, in the early seasons, the highest status race to be staged outside of the Speedworth promotion's home circuits. The European Championship has a remarkable history, with its first runnings at Barlo in the Netherlands. 1966 National Team League. Speedworth set up a national team league comprising 6 teams based at 7 stadia. The first match took place at Aldershot on the 21st of May 1966 when the Knights beat the visiting Ipswich team. Aldershot Knights managed by Frank Howlett, Eastbourne Eagles managed by Charlie Dugard, Ipswich Witches managed by Pop Perry, London Sparrows. The team's home fixtures were shared between Wimbledon and New Cross Stadia. Yarmouth Bloaters managed by Ted Payne, Chichester the team that never was. The team is referred to in text from the period with top driver Don Mason mentioned as a driver. The team would most likely have used either Aldershot or Eastbourne as its base, but no fixtures were contested by the team. 1971 and AMP 1972 Auto Speedway Team League. The Auto Speedway Team League was set up by stock car promoter Speedworth International for the 1971 season. The competition only lasted just under 2 years. The racing featured the promotion's regular Superstox cars with identical bodies, although underneath the chassis often varied. The body style was based on those sported by the touring South African team in the 1970 season. The prototype car was displayed on Speedworth's stand at the 1971 Racing Car Show. The season was structured so that all the teams had 2 matches against each other, one home and one away. Outside the league competition there were also a couple of multi-team tournament meetings. The 1972 fixture schedule was not completed due to some driving standards problems and also the closure of Cross-in-Hand Raceway in August that year. Each team was managed by a key person from within the Speedworth organization, and the team lineups included most of the top drivers from the era. Despite the closure of Cross-in-Hand, Speedworth later staged 2 friendly matches at Aldershot between the Aldershot Knights and the Cross-in-Hand Tigers. Aldershot Knights. Team manager Ted Weaver. Drivers Denny Pearson, Derry Warwick, Roy Wood, Stan Warwick, Ken Etwell, John Field. The Knights were based at Aldershot Stadium in Tongham. Cross-in-Hand Tigers team manager Les Eaton. Drivers Dave Pearce, Dave Hindle, Alan Cox, Biff O'Sweeney, Art Fowler, Gordon Street. The Tigers were based at Cross-in-Hand Stadium in Sussex. Eastbourne Lions team manager Ken Denham. Drivers Chris Denham, Barry Kelleher, Rod Waller, Jim Stewart, Nigel Fox, Graham Minchin. The Lions joined the league in 1972 and were based at Arlington Stadium, near Eastbourne. Ipswich Foxes team manager Harry Barnes. Drivers Skid Parish, Tony Grant, Norman Crowe, Mike Reed, John Biddle, Alan Kaiser. Reserve Paul Rookyard. Ringwood Badgers team manager Alan Butler. Drivers John Edwards, Tom Edwards, Cliff Maidment, Gordon Maidment, Derek Warwick, Roy Eaton. The Badgers joined the league in 1972 and were based at Matcham's Park, although they only ever hosted one home match, which was against the Wimbledon Dons. Walthamstow Lions team manager Roger Fennings. Drivers 1971 Chris Denham, Barry Kelleher, Jack Percy, Rod Waller, Jim Stewart, Les Holland. Occasional Leon Smith. The team was originally going to be called the White City Slickers. Neither White City nor Walthamstow were allocated a team for the 1972 season. The driver lined up transferred to Eastbourne for the 1972 campaign. Wimbledon Canaries. Dons team manager Reg Etherington. Drivers 1971 Eric Taylor, Brian Kensett, Tony Mellish, Frank Boyles, John Field, Keith Franzella. 1972 Jim Davey, Frank Boyles, Barry Plummer, Pete Welland, Brian Kensett, Steve Monk, Keith Franzella. Reserve Eric Taylor. Based at the Wimbledon Stadium in Plough Lane. The team were originally known as the Canaries but changed the name to the Dons for the 1972 season. Wisbech Fen Tigers team manager Jack Gray. Drivers Roger Warnes, John Gray, Rick Drury, Tony May, Stu Blythe, Jack Savage. Reserves Trevor Blythe, Malcolm Burrell. The Fen Tigers were the inaugural champions in 1971. Yarmouth Greyhounds team manager Ted Payne. Drivers 1971 Joe Cracknell, Horry Barnes, Colin Byrne, Trevor Blythe, Alan Taylor, Doug McMahon. 1972, Doug McMahon, Alan Taylor, Bob Perry, Brian Randall, Pete Marshall, Doug Wardropper. Corgi Toys. Toy manufacturer Corgi produced and sold die-cast models of two major championship-winning cars in their Corgi Rockets range. The cars were those of four-time British champion Derek Fisk and 1967 world champion Adrian Todd Sweeney. These were a good choice to represent the formula, as Sweeney's car still had a cut-down stock body whilst Fisk's was one of the newer homemade cabs not derived from a road car. The cars were sold individually and in varying sets, which also included tow cars, trailer and a Jaguar pace car. The cars were launched in the 1970 season. The Todd Sweeney shell was later reused by Corgi as a generic silver liveried Superstock car.